It may seem like an impossible task, but we're up for the challenge. Welcome to MojoPlays. Today, we're going to be counting down the top 50 most influential games of all time. This list is based on their influence on the industry and their lasting appeal. For this episode, we're counting down entries 20 to 11. Enjoy!
Number 20, SimCity. City management being what it is, it's hard not to feel a bit skeptical when someone comes up to you and says, hey, there's a simulation of that experience that's one of the most enjoyable, memorable, and enduring of its kind in all gaming history. Nevertheless, the place that SimCity holds in game canon can only be really described in such terms. It's a product that foreshadowed a change in the way we perceive the minutiae of everyday life, and for good or bad, managed to gamify it for the masses. SimCity puts the player in charge of one of a variety of selectable cities, the original game notably offering unique scenarios with real-world cities, a practice which its sequels and successors would emulate. Everything from taxes to school and civic service placement to the satisfaction of citizens is in your hands. You serve as the unseen hand guiding the lives of many virtual citizens. This was the game that, for many, put Maxis on the map. Their broader sim line of games branched off from SimCity with more than 2 decades of beloved releases to their name. Will Wright, co-founder of Maxis, was driven to use the clout afforded to him by SimCity in order to expand on that title's virtual sandbox concept. His efforts culminated in interesting genre experiments like 2008's Spore and foundational works like The Sims. Number 19, Mortal Kombat. Finish him, the announcer declares at the end of the match. The winning player quickly inputs a series of moves resulting in an utterly brutal killing of their opponent's avatar. Sometimes it's uppercutting the rival character's head clean off, other times it's ripping out their still beating heart. However, the result is consistently the same. Someone dies in horrific fashion. Mortal Kombat's grasp of graphic violence may seem quaint by the standards of the present, showcased as it is with pixelated sprites and basic special effects. But in the 1990s, video game violence was very much a hot-button topic for a reason. In its own twisted way, Midway's classic fighting game can be seen as a refuting of the idea that in-game killing is at all comparable to the real thing. Blood splatters, limb, and organs are removed without much effort, and it's all rendered in a fashion comparable to a really dark cartoon. Plus, the fact that the game is centered around a fictional, interdimensional combat tournament involving literal gods and superhuman fighters should be a clear indicator of how realistic the scenario is. Legislators did not feel the same. In 1992, U.S. Senators Joe Lieberman and Herb Kohl began a series of hearings on the dangers of video game violence. Under threat of government intervention, the game industry was left with little choice but to establish the Entertainment Software Rating Board, which would classify and rate games based on the perceived appropriate age for players. Mortal Kombat changed how violence is viewed in the industry and inspired discussions that are still happening to this day, for better or worse. Number 18, GoldenEye 007. Based on the 1995 film starring Pierce Brosnan, GoldenEye was not only the highest profile Bond game to achieve financial and critical success, it also managed to thoroughly change the paradigm by which first-person shooters were made for consoles. Rare spent months doing extensive research, utilizing resources from both the original film's creators and their publisher Nintendo, and looking at the ground broken by light gun games such as Virtua Cop. The fruit of their labors was a work of art that fused the technology of the era with a sharp vision. GoldenEye 007 excelled in its recreation of the film's action scenes, its stylistic flourishes, and its balanced tone. It offered routes for run-and-gun action or more clandestine, stealth-minded operations, with the selection of weapons being supportive of player intentions either way. While not necessarily realistic, Rare's active embrace of real-world locations and weapons in lieu of constructing a more fantastical setting was closer to reality than many shooters of the time. That and the implementation of competitive multiplayer, albeit of the offline couch co-op variety, would prove vital in the face of gaming's progression as a medium. Today's military FPSs and similar games that sell themselves on the authenticity of their weapon simulations owe a debt to GoldenEye 007 for showing that there was an audience eager for such material. Rare, however, opted to use the game as a jumping-off point for other, less grounded titles like Perfect Dark, though the measured fun of GoldenEye still peeks through on occasion. Number 17, Super Mario 64.
It's me, Mario!
1996 was a big year of changes for gaming. particularly with regards to the evolution of the platformer. The limitations of the side-scrolling perspective were a thing of the past. More open and unrestricted worlds could be implemented thanks to the advent of 3D rendering technology. Into the fray came Super Mario 64, the merits of which became clear mere moments after booting up its cartridge. Mario returns, visualized here as a fully three-dimensional character with charming animations and actual voice work. The Mushroom Kingdom shows up as a grand polygonal playground. At the center is Peach's castle, quaint yet elegant in design. Warp pipes were back again, but in a more limited role. Traveling to different levels requires Mario to jump through shimmering paintings. Furthermore, each level took the patented Mario concept of being a unique world in itself and fleshed it out in light of the grander presentation. Vast fields of grass, snowy mountains, and haunted mansions are just some of the locales we got to explore in full, with the usual expectation of secrets and expansive chambers fulfilled. All that remained at the structural core of 3D games in general, and 3D platformers especially, was shown or became codified in Super Mario 64. The range of movement, thanks to the Nintendo 64's analog controls and the shifting camera angles, are of particular note. They'd become the precursor to our modern conception of video game camera and movement design. Number 16. Half-Life.
They're waiting for you, Gordon, in the test chamber.
As the FPS slowly overtook the platformer as gaming's dominant genre, many developers sought to keep shooters fresh and innovative in order to compete. Fantastical settings, new combat mechanics, higher resolution textures, anything to keep gamers satisfied and the money flowing freely. Enter the Valve Corporation, a group of ex-Microsoft software engineers and non-gaming creative types. They aimed to deliver something the gamers hadn't quite experienced before, a game rooted in 1950s pulp science fiction but adapted for the home computer. What players got was Half-Life, a winding tale of survival amid a harrowing alien invasion. Its hook was shockingly simple. The player would stay in the perspective of Gordon Freeman, our voiceless hero, for the entire duration. No cutaways to the alien's perspective, no narration providing backstory for the world, just you and Freeman in the heat of things. This meant more time for deadly shootouts with helicopters, elite soldiers, dead scientists controlled by the iconic head crab creatures, and grotesque beings from another dimension. Keeping the game focused on moment-to-moment action isn't the only thing Half-Life contributed to modern shooter design. Throughout the game, a number of areas are dedicated to precise platforming and elaborate puzzle sequences used to break up stretches of brutal combat. This specific combination of action and adventure game elements would be explored in greater depth not only in later Half-Life games, but in other companies' works.
Great Scott! Gordon Freeman!
Number 15. Pokémon Red and Blue. You walk into tall grass. Suddenly, and without warning, a frantic man in lab gear appears and shouts, "Don't go there!" He has you follow him back to his laboratory in town before he explains himself. He's Professor Oak. The world's a dangerous place for a kid such as yourself, and you need protection. Nearby, 3 orbs rest on a lab bench, housing 3 very unique creatures. Welcome to the world of Pokemon, where your friends are also your companions and your fighting force. 1 part bug hunt, 1 part pet simulator, and 1 part role-playing game, the original Pokemon titles, Red and Blue, weren't shy about setting themselves apart from the pack. You guide a team of 6 creatures, pocket monsters, shortened to the titular Pokemon, make them strong by battling other trainers of Pokemon, and set out on an adventure across the fictional region of Kanto. Everything about Red and Blue, from the individual designs of Pokemon to the rock-paper-scissors-like combat system, remains brilliant even now, and struck a chord with people back then. The trading system, which allowed players to swap their Pokemon, was ahead of its time, and also reflected the sense of camaraderie Game Freak wanted to encapsulate. See also the 2 releases, 1 experience model. It's not surprising that a franchise worth billions of dollars in games, merchandise, and assorted media spawned from this linked duology. Number 14, Space War. Outside of gaming, there are those who might hear names like Bushnell, Bayer, or in this case, Steve Russell, and think, who's that and why should I care? History isn't important to enjoying games. To which we would respond with, because honoring those who shaped this medium and acknowledging the medium's origins matters in deciding where we take it from here. Early games are an integral part of the systems and techniques that are still in use today. A modicum of respect is the least we can offer in return. Space War, while not the most intricate production in the early history of gaming, does merit mentioning here on the grounds that it's a foundational work. It was conceived by Harvard University employee Steve Russell as a showcase of the PDP-1's display capabilities, taking the form of a simple space battle between two starships. The needle and the wedge circled around a tiny star, all of which were visualized as monochromatic shapes and attempted to shoot one another with torpedoes while in motion. Programmers loved the game. They especially appreciated the simplicity of its design, which allowed them to recreate the game on other mainframe computers. By the 1970s, hundreds of computers with monitors were produced, further contributing to the proliferation of Space War. And in time, coin-op games like Computer Space and Asteroids were built on the space shooter concept with great success, leading to gaming as we know it. Number 13, Tecmo Super Bowl.
Ready, down, put.
At the risk of inspiring scorn, or just plain and simple confusion, we feel the need to mention this late-era NES game. It's by no means the most technically advanced football or general sports simulation game in existence, and it doesn't have the degree of content and polish presented by later releases. Yet, to this day, Tecmo Super Bowl still maintains a cult following and is enjoyed by those who know of it. Part of that may have to do with what it offered for the time. Tecmo Super Bowl had the official licenses and permissions of the National Football League and the National Football League Players Association, letting the developers make use of then-current NFL team rosters. Even now, you can jump right in and take command of the NFL's best athletes circa 1990, playing according to the then-current NFL season schedule. It handily illustrated the ways in which game creators could play with licenses to great effect, which we've seen expanded upon in the many sports games of the present. Respectable enough for its authenticity, TSB is also crucially a good game on its own merits. It retains the more arcade-like stylings of the first Tecmo Bowl, but introduced a host of new features: a coin toss, quarters that last 5 minutes, the ability to view statistics, and so on. Other Tecmo Bowl games, and indeed subsequent football games, would run with these elements and make them fundamental to the concept of simulating football. Number 12, Dragon Quest. A little before the founding of Chunsoft, one of its major designers, Yuji Horii, was drawn to a game called Wizardry. Enchanted by the look of its world and the depths of its mechanics, Horii kept the game in his thoughts through to his career at Chunsoft. He would eventually start toying with the elements of Western role-playing while working on a game of his own, a game that would combine dialogue-driven storytelling with playful visuals and character building. And so we got Dragon Quest, released in North America under the name Dragon Warrior to avoid legal troubles with simulation publications over the pen and paper game Dragon Quest. The central thrust to Dragon Quest's narrative is quite simple on reflection. There's a princess who's been kidnapped and an evil dragon lord in a distant castle that your hero must rescue and defeat respectively. Some complications involving relics and prophetic instructions arise, but in practice, the story is an excuse to engage with a larger world of magic and mystery. The hero needs to be built up in terms of combat experience and range of abilities, which means engaging in the time-honored tradition of random encounters. Iconic foes, such as the slime, exist to be killed not only for the experience points, but for gold, a resource to be traded for better armor and weapons. Boilerplate though this mechanical design may be for RPGs, it's important to remember that the formula had to be introduced for it to become commonplace. Dragon Quest laid the groundwork that other, more complex titles would build upon. Indeed, if not for Chunsoft's work, Japanese role-playing may have gone in a completely different direction. Number 11, Metal Gear Solid.
This is Snake. Colonel, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
The years of Sony's inaugural console were dominated by two types of games: technically proficient titles intended to showcase the hardware's potential, and narratively involving games aiming to add complexity and nuance to the medium's standard quality of storytelling. Metal Gear Solid was among the first titles to try to merge these two camps into one singular experience, the results of which remain astounding to this day. Metal Gear Solid tells the story of Solid Snake, an elite soldier pulled out of retirement in order to investigate and squash an insurrection in the making. Venturing through the stark hallways of the Shadow Moses nuclear disposal site in Alaska, it soon made clear to Snake that things are more complicated than they seem. The story twists, contorts, and proves clever at every turn, managing to explore themes of genetic destiny and the consequences of war with surprising care. The game takes many of its cues from Hollywood scene staging and screenwriting, which ended up foreshadowing efforts by the game's industry to actively mimic or pay homage to major motion pictures. That it manages to blend Hideo Kojima's sharp narrative direction with a varied range of weapons and among the most enduring of video game boss battles is truly spectacular to behold. On top of all that, Metal Gear Solid was also a major driving force for the emerging stealth game genre. Various design elements, such as crawling being quieter than running and limited ammunition for weapons, have since become commonplace for games where sneaking is the central mechanic.
He's killed 3 people?
Yeah. Say he's using stealth, too.
Stealth?
Check out these other great clips from MojoPlays, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.